I am continuing in my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am continuing reading in a chronological order, according to event, not according to publication or volume. So I'm skipping around a bit as I move along. We are continuing in the Gospels. We are right near the end. Mary has anointed Christ with the oil, with the ointment. That happened about 6 days before the Passover. Then we had the triumphal entry, which was a few days later. And so we're right in here. We're between the triumphal entry and the Feast of Passover. Now, I did make them error and said that the Feast of Unleavened Bread was the first day of Passover. That's not right. There's Passover, and then Unleavened Bread is a 7-day feast following. So his triumphal entry was not on the Feast of Unleavened Bread, as I said. Now, in our last reading, we read in Matthew about the cleansing of the temple again, casting out the money changers, cursing the fig tree, and a question of authority. That's what we read last. And that was just after the triumphal entry. So we're going to read this again. It's going to be the same basic account, the same basic information, but we're going to read it now in Mark. In this video, we have a Joseph Smith translation. Now, what the Joseph Smith translation is, this is a translation or correction done by Joseph Smith to restore those passages that have been lost or corrupted over the years. Mark chapter 11, verses 12 through 33. And on the morrow, when they were come from Bethany, he was hungry. And seeing a fig tree afar off, having leaves, he came, if haply he might find anything thereon. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for the time of figs was not yet. And Jesus answered and said unto it, No man eat fruit of thee hereafter forever. And his disciples heard it. And they come to Jerusalem, and Jesus went into the temple, and began to cast out them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers, and the seats of them that sold doves, and would not suffer that any man should carry any vessel through the temple. And he taught, saying unto them, Is it not written, My house shall be called of the nations the house of prayer? But ye have made it a den of thieves. And the scribes and the chief priests heard it, and sought how they might destroy him, for they feared him, because all the people was astonished at his doctrine. And when even was come, he went out of the city. We're going to pause it there. Mark gives us a different order of events. According to Matthew, there was the triumphal entry, which ended at the temple, at which point Christ started teaching, and he cast out the money changers and all that. Then he goes back to Bethany that evening, and the next day he comes out, curses the fig tree, and it is withered. Now, here in Mark, he comes from Bethany into Jerusalem. On his way, he curses the fig tree. Then he gets back into Jerusalem. This is the day after the triumphal entry, and he cleanses the temple. Now, Matthew, the way it's worded, we're not really sure if he's saying this is the exact order of events or just these are things that were happening at the time. Matthew doesn't really give us chronological events. And so Matthew kind of tells us triumphal entry, cleansing the temple, and the cursing of the fig tree. These are just three things that happened, and exactly the order of events is not necessarily explained in Matthew. We are getting that here in Mark. That's actually not uncommon when you compare the Gospels. Matthew does that a lot. And so that's what we have now. Again, just like the first cleansing of the temple back in the first Passover that we read about way back at the beginning, he's casting them out because what they're doing is they're transacting business. So they're selling animals for sacrifices. They're the money changers. These are the ones, people come from Greece, and the money changers are there. They say, oh, well, you can't use Greek money here. You got to use the Jewish money. And so in order to get the Jewish money, in order to pay for things, they exchange the money. They say, okay, you got so much in, say you have 100 gold in Greek money. Well, okay, I'll give you 95 gold in Jewish money so that you have something you can spend here, and that extra 5 is my fee. You give me the 100, I give you 95 and keep the 5 for my fee. This was the kind of thing that was going on, and it was happening in the temple. And that is why Christ is casting them out and calling them a den, saying it is a den of thieves. Because this is not what it's against the law of Moses to do these things. But no, the fig tree has been cursed. So after the triumphal entry, he went back to Bethany. Now he's coming back. He curses the fig tree, cleanses the temple, and then returns to Bethany. So this is the day after the triumphal entry. Now we are going to pick this up in verse 20, and it will be 2 days after the triumphal entry. And in the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree dried up from the roots. And Peter, calling to remembrance, saith unto him, Master, behold, the fig tree which thou cursest is withered away. And Jesus answering saith unto them, Have faith in God, for verily I say unto you, that whosoever shall say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that those things which he saith shall come to pass, he shall have whatsoever he saith. Therefore I say unto you, what things soever ye desire, when ye pray, believe that ye receive them, and ye shall have them. And when ye stand praying, forgive, if ye have aught against any, that your Father also which is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses. But if ye do not forgive, neither will your Father which is in heaven forgive your trespasses. Again, no clue why he cursed the fig tree. Peter is the one that notices it and points it out, and Christ again gives his lesson on faith. It's a different wording, but it's the same doctrine as in Matthew. But then we also have this, if you ask in faith, you'll receive, which is what Matthew is teaching. If you have the faith, you can do anything. But Christ is saying, if you have faith, but you have not yet forgiven your neighbor, well, you might have issues there. He's putting another kind of caveat on this. Having faith is not necessarily enough if you are carrying a grudge. But it's more, carrying a grudge will hinder your faith. So now let's finish this, verse 27. And they come again to Jerusalem, and as he was walking in the temple, there come to him the chief priests and the scribes and the elders, and say unto him, By what authority doest thou these things? And who gave thee this authority to do these things? And Jesus answered and said unto them, I will also ask of you one question, and answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I do these things. The baptism of John, was it from heaven or of men? Answer me. And they reasoned with themselves, saying, If we shall say from heaven, he will say, Why then did ye not believe him? But if we shall say of men, they feared the people, for all men counted John that he was a prophet indeed. And they answered and said unto Jesus, We cannot tell. And Jesus answering said unto them, Neither do I tell you by what authority I do these things. Mark here doesn't really give us any new information, other than giving us a more complete timeline. The order of events is, I believe, more correct in Mark. He doesn't have the parable of the two sons that Matthew has, and he does mention forgiveness, forgive others so that you will be forgiven, as part of the whole discourse on faith. But other than that, there's not much difference here. So let us look at the Joseph Smith translation. In verse 12, instead of they were come, it is they came. Verse 13, I'm going to have to reread the whole thing here. And seeing a fig tree afar off, having leaves, he came to it with his disciples. And as they supposed, he came to it to see if he might find anything thereon. And when he came to it, there was nothing but leaves, for as yet the figs were not ripe. So that's interesting. It's not that there were no figs on it, but that they had not yet been ripened. They have not yet ripened. Now, the fig tree is the last to blossom in the spring. And, we'll even get the parable of the fig tree later on, that whenever it starts to bud and shoot forth leaves, summer's almost there. So we saw that if it had leaves, then you would kind of expect it to have fruit. It doesn't, or at least it doesn't have any ripe fruit. That's interesting. But in 14, instead of Jesus answered and said unto it, it's Jesus spake and said unto it. So he's not answering the fig tree. And at the end, his disciples heard it is corrected to heard him. In verse 15, at the beginning, it now says, and they came to Jerusalem. And then at the end there, and the seats of them who sold doves. In verse 16, instead of any man should carry any vessel, it's just any man should carry a vessel. In verse 18, the priests is singular now. The chief priest heard him. All people were astonished. Minor grammatical corrections. In verse 21, saith is corrected to said. Verse 22 now reads, and Jesus spake and said unto him, have faith in God. So, again, minor clarifications. In verse 23 at the end, he shall have whatsoever he saith fulfilled. Verse 24 is now, therefore I say unto you, whatsoever things ye desire, when ye pray, believe that ye receive, and ye shall have whatsoever ye ask. Verse 25 changes which to who. Verse 26, ye is corrected to you, and which to who? In 27, come is now came again to Jerusalem, and now there come to him the chief priests is there came to him the chief priest. In 28, say is now said. In 29, where it says, I will ask you one question, and answer me, and I will tell you it is now. I will also ask of you one question, answer me, and then I will tell you. In verse 30, instead of the baptism of John, was it from heaven, is simply, was the baptism of John from heaven. Verse 32, this one will read the entire thing. But if we shall say of men, we shall offend the people. Therefore they feared the people, for all people believed John, that he was a prophet indeed. And then in 33, we again change saith to said. All of this is minor grammatical corrections and clarifications. The wording is definitely better in the Joseph Smith translation. Makes a whole lot more sense. And we do get in the verse 32 the thought process of the Pharisees more, but no new information. So I'm going to leave that here, and we will read all this again in Luke next. So I will see you there.